you're arriving in another country. The new environment feels thrilling, you're immersing yourself in the new culture, new work and new people. A lot of exciting experiences lie ahead. For a while your life is amazing, but eventually the novelty fades, the honeymoon period reaches its expiration date and you find yourself in the box of routine. Pretty much the same as you had in your home country, but with increased number of challenges. At some point, reality hits you and you start asking yourself, was it all one big mistake?
Hey friend, my name is Dima and I'm a serial immigrant. 7 years ago I left my home country. I lived in several countries and I truly enjoyed the experience, but today I want to talk about downsides of immigrants' life. I think I've had in total 3 stages in my immigration journey. I started with sort of touristic stage or nomadic stage we can call it, when I first started traveling, living in Southeast Asia and Bali. Then I moved to expat stage when I moved to Georgia and lived there for a year. And then I moved to the last immigration stage when I moved here in the Netherlands. So in my head, living abroad has this scale. You start with temporary living like tourists or nomad, and at the end of the scale it's a permanent moving abroad, so it's immigration, working expat, etc. So I want to list you the challenges that I personally faced, and you might too, depending on the stage you're in. Let's take a look at them. Starting with the temporary stage where you're just moving abroad. You may be a digital nomad or you may be just a tourist staying in one place for a long time. In this case, the first challenge you're facing is that you don't have any rights in the country you move in. You cannot pay taxes in the place, you don't have any help from the government, so basically you don't have any official status. And it may sound okay for some people, but eventually you kind of feel tourists living abroad, and it's never good because you don't know really where you are in this country and what's gonna happen next in terms of changes, because at any point you can just basically get kicked out of the country when you're in this stage. Second challenge is that it's usually more expensive to live in a place like nomad or tourist compared to locals, because you usually renting either through some kind of Facebook groups or friends or through Airbnb and Booking, and it always has more expensive pricing. You don't have any local discounts, you don't have any programs that many countries have for locals. Essentially, the government want to make on you as much money as possible because you are tourist. Next challenge, also related to money, is tax and financial complications. As we already established, you don't have any status. It means you probably cannot open a bank account. You cannot open brokerage local accounts. It depends on the countries where you moved from and the country you're moving into, but sometimes there could be quite complicated issues with the financial situation, with tax situation, because at some point you might become a tax resident and it becomes a huge headache. You probably don't want to get into this. Most of the tourists and nomads, even while they're working remotely, they're into this kind of gray area where they are still tourists in the new country and they continue paying tax in their home country, for example, but it's also not 100% legal, so it's a little bit complicated always with the governments and taxes and finances. Next, also related to legality of things, you're not technically allowed to work in this country if you don't have any official status, you don't have any working permit. Same way most of the nomads and remote tourists, let's call them that, they operate in the gray area and they basically just work because probably nobody will catch you by your hand if you're working remotely, of course. If you start working physically, like in the service industry or in tourist industry, it's already much more harder because you can get caught and it can lead to all sorts of challenges afterwards. So this is quite a big issue, and also remote work struggles in general general, not all people want to work remotely. You're missing out on your colleagues, on the discussion in the office. It of course depends on the company, but sometimes people feel a little bit isolated working remotely. And the last one is time zone, depending where your work is and where you're moving. But sometimes if you work in Europe and you live in Southeast Asia, for example, there are quite a big time difference, and it's hard to continue being productive for your work and for yourself as well, because your routine can get all kinds of messed up. Next one is pretty big, and it's visas. And visas are always pain. It depends on your citizenship, on your passport, but most of the countries don't want you to stay long term unless you apply for some kind of permit. In Southeast Asia, for example, visa runs are very popular, and countries don't really like when you do visa runs. Some countries kind of let it slide. Some countries can put some sort of ban on your entering. This is always also in your mind, that you have this time until the end of the visa and you need to figure out how to apply for a new one and do a visa run. It always adds additional challenges and just in general reduces your quality of day-to-day life. And the last one for the temporary stays is healthcare access. Healthcare access is usually reserved for local citizens. Of course, there are countries with private healthcare, most of them actually, but again, we coming back to the costs, because the private healthcare, and especially for foreigners, will cost you much more, and you usually cannot apply for healthcare insurance in this country, and you have to use either some kind of nomadic insurance or just pay out of your pocket for everything, and it could cost you quite a lot. But let's get to the challenges that you may face when you move to the country completely permanently. You decided to either stay as kind of working expat, or you maybe decided that this country is your future and you're staying for a very long time, so you become an immigrant, which is my current stage here in the Netherlands. The first challenge, which is not kind of the challenge but the thing you will face, is that novelty effect will fade out and you will be stuck in a rut again. And you were excited to move to the country, and you were maybe excited to leave your routine back at home, and when you're moving there are a lot of novelty effect, a lot of new things to experience, but at some point, no matter where you're moving in, you will be back to this routine, because the routine is not something you can change with changing the country. And if you have an unhealthy routines, or if you're just very bored of your routine, it's not something a new country can help, unless you're going to be changing countries constantly, and even in that case you will probably get the same experience with each new country at some point. Next challenge is that if you moving as a working expat, which most of the people I think do, in many cases you are this company dependent, so your visa directly related to the company you're working for, and if you want to change the company it's usually allowed, but usually you have some kind of deadlines. It's much more stressful compared to if you wanted to change your job in your home country. This adds a little bit of stress of you depending on somebody or some entity. If you're an entrepreneur, you of course dependent on the success of your own company, and if you're a freelancer as well. Next thing, which is not also a challenge but just a thing you will probably experience, the more you're integrating into the new country, the harder it will be to change it to the new country or even come back home. In my experience is how humans operate. We start integrating, we start making friends or getting into those familiar routines. It's harder and harder to pull yourself back and just throw you somewhere else. It was already hard in the first place to change the country, right? And now it's gonna be even more harder and harder. So if you want to try and live in several countries, for example, it would be better to just do it in the short terms and then finally find your home. But yeah, that's just a fact that you will probably face. The next challenge is actually pretty big big, I think, for everybody and for me as well, is that lack of social support, parents, friends. The thing is that when you're moving to the new country and you're staying there permanently, at some point you maybe want to start a family, for example, and in case of family, of course, it's much easier to have a social support, but not only if you want to have kids, but just in general, there are some things in day-to-day life that much more easier to get if you have social system, social support, people that love you and they are kind of around you. Quite hard when you don't have, then you're losing this when you're moving from the home country. Of course, it depends. You maybe your home country is very close, or your parents or your friends can easily visit, but in many cases it's not that easy, especially if you're moving across the globe on the other side of the planet, and in that case it's become almost impossible to see your friends. I know for many people it's becoming eventually a turning point when they decided to move back home because the lack of this social support. The next challenge I see is a political dependency. When you're moving to the new country, of course you're getting into the new political environment. It depends on your political views, but it might be not aligned with your own, and if this is a case, you're kind of becoming a black sheep. Back at home, back in your home country, you can kind of affect this with your vote or with some political activism, but in the new country you usually don't have a vote unless you get some kind of fast track to citizenship. You're kind of stuck with this political agenda, whatever that is, and you cannot really even affect it by any way, kind of have to bear it no matter what. I think it's quite a big downside. That's why I'm not fully understand the immigration systems when you have to live in the country for a very, very long time before you get a citizenship. So you're, for example, staying for 8 years and you cannot vote. 8 years is a huge chunk of human life, and you basically don't have any opportunity to participate in the political system in this new country. To me, it's a bit strange. The next challenge, which might come as a surprise for some people, but moving abroad is actually very expensive and you don't think about this much. You're kind of excited to move to this new country, you're already forcing yourself to make all the documents, etc., but you don't actually think about the financial side of the story, and when you're moving, you're faced with this kind of financial burden of moving. It's renting the new place or buying a house, it's buying all the new furniture, it's figuring out the local personal finance situation, and before you will learn it, you will probably make some mistakes. It's very hard to pinpoint exactly what are the financial implications. It depends on the person, depends on the country, but you will face some of them for sure. It's really hard to avoid them unless you're like planned everything perfectly, or you have a great company that helps you with everything when you're moving and pays for everything, which is quite rare, to be honest. So whether you want it or not, you will have to save up some money, you will have to put them into this immigration journey. And it's quite interesting that, for example, in Canada, they made it part of their immigration system. When you're moving to Canada, you have to show quite a big chunk of money. I think it was like $20,000 or $25,000. They know that you have money for this immigration process. This is also a reason why I'm not a big fan when local people think that expats shouldn't get any kind of incentives when they're moving. The huge example is the 30% ruling. Here in the Netherlands, you get a 30% break of your income for 5 years, which is already less, and they're trying to get rid of this system. On one side, I understand that there's high-skilled workers in the Netherlands and high-skilled workers that moving to the country. These local high-skilled workers, they're missing out on this great tax break. Also, at the same time, moving to the Netherlands is extremely expensive, and you'll probably get in 5 years maybe 40 to 50,000, depends on your salary break. It sounds quite a lot, but in reality it's not that much, to be honest, and you will probably spend half of it or even more to settling down in the country. I would have been, for example, asked if I want to give up this break, for example, in the exchange of being born in the Netherlands and get citizenship. I would rather pay the full tax and was born here, or get a fast track to citizenship. Also, in addition to the costs, it might be you will face some tax implications, depends again on the double taxation system, but if you have a lot of estate or some investment back in your country, it may become a headache to pay taxes in both countries, figure out the double taxation situation. Some tax implications can become a bit of a headache. The next challenge is a language and communication barrier, and depends on the country, of course. You might not the new language of this country unless it's an English-speaking country, or unless you specifically learn the language beforehand. It may get you into all kinds of issues, the government issues, the communication issues, awkward situation in your day-to-day lives. Probably a good idea to start learning a language beforehand. At the same time, depends on your life. For example, still don't really speak Dutch very well. You pretty easily can get by here with English. For me, it's currently just not a high value priority. I hope it will change soon and I will finally start getting deeper into the language learning, but I can understand people who don't really have time, or it's just not a priority for them to learn a new language, and it's of course make you isolated a little bit more, in addition to all the other challenges that we discussed in this video before. And of course it might be not only the language, but just a cultural barrier, cultural differences. It's pretty easy to find a lot of videos in Japan, for example, when people from Western countries move to Japan and gets into all kind of weird stuff because Japan is such a different cultural and mindset and all of that type of country. And it brings me to another challenge. It depends again on the differences between the countries you're moving in, but it may be a completely different cultural environment, so you will have to adjust, because when we grow up in the country, it's very easy. You're growing up with this culture, you know it's kind of from the young age, and you absorb it and you kind of adjust yourself to this culture. And of course, when you're moving, you basically thrown into a completely new culture for you, or slightly different, but it's still different. It depends on many factors, but it might be quite a hard challenge as well. And some people might be never adjusted, so they kind of become living in this expat and immigration bubbles, and sometimes they just leave back at home because they were never feel home in this new country. The next one is related to a political situation, the modern one especially. I kind of came up with it because of the recent events, but you often become a blame ship or even discriminated just because you're immigrant. It's a case in many countries around the world, especially with the popularity of more of a right-leaned governments. They often have the agenda that immigrants are the ones that they can blame everything on. General, at least, that immigrants are blamed for everything. It's just not true. It's much more complicated, and many of the expats and immigrants actually bring the net positive to the country rather than the net negative, especially if we're talking about high-skilled migrants. Xenophobia and discrimination, depending on your race or nationality, can be a huge issue. In my experience, it could happen in absolutely any country around the world, no matter which continent, no matter where are you from. You might have to prepare yourself for, you may have to be ready that you can become a scapegoat as an immigrant. And the last one, which is much more general one, I recently started feeling more and more. I might even record a separate video about this. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. This is a struggle with identity, with mental health. It can be related to other factors in your life as well, but it also can be related that you are located in not your home environment, not your home country that you grew up with, and you might struggle with kind of identity issues. I really like that my friend, we were discussing this, and she said that when you're moving to the countries, your inner self kind of becomes splitted. So for example, you lived in 2 countries, you were splitted into 2, you lived in 3 or more countries, you just shatter yourself into several pieces. After some time, it becomes really hard to understand who you are and where you truly feel home. For some people it's of course easier, for some people it's harder, but in my experience you will become kind of a weird person that never feels 100% home anymore anywhere. So if you take me, for example, if I go back to my home country right now, I will definitely be alienated there as well. Probably even I feel home here much more than back in my home country, but also not 100%. And this is something you just have to go through. It may be interesting experience, at least it is for me, to kind of figure out, identify yourself, how you're going to live with this new discovery, but it also can be quite challenging and mentally draining, or even lead to some issues with your mental state. So this is something I discovered as kind of a challenge as well. Saying all of that, in my opinion, if you're moving to the country you truly love, all the pros you're getting are outweighed all the downsides I listed here, and some of these issues just can be overcome and can be solved with time. But the most important thing that I will leave you is that make sure you truly love the new place and that you truly feel there, at least partially home. That's why I would recommend to start with this temporary immigration. So if you want to move somewhere, just go there for maybe several months first, then just move there and become kind of a expat / nomad, stay there for a while, maybe a year, and then you will start learning more and more. The novelty will phase out and you will face with the reality, and that's when the real learning starts. And then if you finally decide this is the place for you, you can just become already more rooted, become more integrated, and the real immigration begins at this point. But if not, maybe it makes sense to go back to your home country or change the country again and try everything from the beginning. To me personally, looking back at my journey, I think it all worth it. It was amazing experiences, and I'm not even ruling out that I might do it all over again. So to move somewhere else, try to live somewhere. But it's just personally who I am. I know about myself. I definitely like living in different countries. So you always have to check with yourself. Is it truly who you are, or this makes you just more miserable? Let me know if you want me to make a video about upsides of the immigration or of nomadic expat experiences. Check my video about pros and cons living here in the Netherlands by this link. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, give this video a thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next one. Doei doei!